Another week of Oh Ship. This week I got introduced to a very, very interesting guest I'm going to tell you all about in a minute. But I wouldn't have never got a chance to meet Dave if it wasn't for my friend Tiffany Milson, who I met at Burning Man way back in 2003. So lucky I got to keep in contact with her over the years. And she happens to work with Dave, who is the Chief Innovation Officer of a company called ServiceNow. Now, if you've never heard of ServiceNow, they're actually a publicly traded company that helps companies manage digital workflows for enterprise operations. Doing about 6 billion a year in revenues is a pretty significant company, to put it mildly, and has been actually recognized as one of the world's most innovative companies. So, needless to say, Dave Wright, their chief innovation officer, has his pulse on what drives innovation. But today we're actually going to focus on what Dave's personal views are on innovation, in particular, leaning into how Dave believes that changing perspective can be a driving force in innovation. So, with that, welcome to this week's O Ship, where we'll discuss about what perspective is everything. Dave, welcome to O Ship.
Freddie, thank you for asking me on.
So I've been dying to talk to you, in front of an audience. You and I have had a couple chats now in advance of the show. You just got such an interesting way you look at life, which was why I was so excited about today's subject. I'd love to give people a chance to get to know you a little bit better first, though. So tell me, like, an innovation, or tell us an innovation that you're associated to, that you someplace in your career that you're excited about or proud of.
So it's kind of tough when you have a job where you're focused on innovation. A lot of the time, it becomes how you influence innovation. So I don't write software, for example. I try and influence people to either position things different ways or perhaps develop different areas. And I think that's another interesting perspective as well. I don't think in any company that is viewed as innovative, innovation can never be one person. It can never be one team. It's got to be like a mindset within the company. You've got to have this innovative mindset. So I've influenced things from how we look at service mapping to having a long road path, convincing people around what we did with artificial intelligence. It could be how we reposition the product to look at things from a more enterprise service level. But for me, it's all about trying to get everyone in the same direction and trying to get them to think about some of these new technologies and how these technologies are going to affect us. But it's I always describe it as the best job in the world and the worst job in the company, because you get to see all this cool tech, but you don't actually control exactly what happens. It's all about trying to influence.
I think this is such an interesting angle that, sometimes when people talk about innovation, they think about, I don't know, some engineer, inventor coming up with some new product or new service, or it can be, happen at a startup or things like that. But when you start thinking about, advice for people that maybe are working within or bigger organizations, or thinking about getting involved in innovation at a big organization, how does being a force in innovation differ when you're in a big company versus, let's say, a smaller company?
So in a smaller company, I suppose if we say it's about influence, you've got less people you have to influence. So it can be easier to get ideas through. The advantage in a bigger company is you've got more resources. So if you convince someone that you want to execute, the execution's so much better because you can pivot a big team to work on something rather than trying to get everyone to stop what they're doing to start to think about this new thing. But one of the really interesting things that I try and get people to think about is most of the big innovations that people talk about today. When people list all these innovative ways of doing things, whether people are talking about Uber or Peloton or Netflix or Airbnb, but what they've done when they've innovated is they haven't actually invented something new, the way you were talking about before. What they've done is they've made something better than it was before. They've made the experience, so they've changed your perspective on how you actually get that service.
Mm,
So what they've done is they've created something where it's so good that you'd rather go there than anything
yeah,
else. So quite often innovation is just doing things better. It's not necessarily
yeah.
doing things new.
One concept I used to find myself talking about a lot was this idea of micro innovations. Is that I think sometimes when they think of innovation, they always think it's like some giant, sweeping, world changing things. But the reality is, at least in my opinion, I think that 99% of innovation are like these little incremental changes that we're all making, whether it's improving experience or just finding little bit ways of making better mousetraps. And I think that's where, it's when you look at some of these larger organizations, it's like, it's actually that they can make hundreds of these micro innovations on an annual basis, and they start to feel sweeping in their cumulative nature, so to speak.
It's true. I mean, you think of the things that have really changed the way people interact on a high level. Probably the biggest thing that changed everything was the concept of a like button, which
Yeah,
in the whole realm of what's created is a tiny little part of it. But
so
that
true.
like button changed the way people interact with each other.
Yeah, it's funny. You think it's like the people think about the big innovation of social networking, but it's the micro innovation of the like button that kind of
Yeah,
really changed how people think about it. So
yeah, the like
so
button.
great segue then. What is it? Before again, I want to get into our subject, but I want people to get a chance to get to know you better. Um, what are things that inspire the way that you think about innovation?
So I think from a work perspective, a lot of the inspiration comes from customers. So speaking to customers and understanding what their challenges are and seeing where they're going. I also get a lot of inspiration from the field resources that we have. So all my friends that are out there speaking to customers daily, they provide lots of feedback to me around what they're seeing out there. But the things that are independent from work, a lot of that comes from looking at trends from what's happening in technology. So starting to see new technologies emerge and understand what those technologies do, but more what those technologies are going to impact us from a business perspective. But I think the thing that really changes the way I think about things the most is probably speaking to kids. Speaking to children is interesting because they're not they're not weighed down by the unbearable weight of knowledge. They haven't got a frame of reference that says what they can and what they can't do. So they tend to think about things in a much purer manner. But also because of the generational shift you have now, they just think about things completely differently to the way I do.
I have to ask, and I'm not trying to embarrass you, Dave, but are you a big kid? Are those your cars behind you, or are those your kids' cars? I'm a big
Well,
here. I have my fair share of toys, so this is a judgment-free zone.
you can say it's both. When we went into lockdown, I was trying to find stuff to do to entertain the kids, and ended up going and buying. They weren't really Lego fans, so I bought these big Lego kits, and first
I
one we
hope
got
you
was a
straighten
car.
them out, by the way. You gotta love Lego.
But I realized after I bought five of them that I was actually buying them for me. I wasn't buying them for them. They enjoy
I
the
have I,
building and then they just leave it.
I have this vision of like when kids are like pestering their parents like, "Daddy, can you buy this for me?" But actually, you're in the store and they're like, "Come on, kids, do you want this? Do you want it? Come on, you want it, right? You want it? Make Daddy buy it. Make Daddy buy
It's
it now."
it's the same. It's the same with gaming consoles. It's like hey kids, there's not much happening. Do you think we should get a PS5? Uh,
I want to make sure you're happy. I want your
yeah,
childhood to be happy.
it's just for you kids. It's all about you.
You kids. It's why you bought them all the legacy game packs, all the going back the 30 years of games. Perfect.
Yeah, sitting trying to convince them that Pac-Man is as good as Minecraft and you can play it for hours.
Oh, that's awesome. So I think a lot of what you just tried to point out a minute ago is about. I love this concept of like, look, no one's told them what's good, bad. That they don't have any reason to believe something's possible or not possible. So I love this concept of we introduced at the beginning of the show that perspective is everything effectively. Can you talk to me and us a little bit more about what that means for you, and how you might apply that in terms of innovative thinking?
So quite often you meet people who feel they've got different problems, feel they've got different challenges. The first time this all clicked for me was it must have been 2013, and I was at a ServiceNow event,
Mhm.
incidentally, and I was meeting all these different customers. I was meeting people who were coming up saying, "Oh, how do I manage this telephony infrastructure we've got? How can I optimize the way I run my hospital, or my challenges managing students, or my challenges managing warehouses?" And I've had these conversations all day, and I spend probably at these meetings I'm speaking for like 10 hours a day. So at the end of the day, I need a bit of space away from everyone where I can just chill and I'll talk. So I was sitting having a drink in a bar away from the hotel where the conference was before I went back for a thing in the evening, and as I was thinking, I realized that everyone actually had the same problem. Whether you're thinking about, well, how do I manage medical assets or telephony assets or IT assets? It's all the same. And how I get a computer fixed or a car fixed or book a vaccination, it's all the same thing. And what I realized was people had a very fixed perspective. So they'd look at what problem they had, and they'd look at a solution and go, yeah, but that solution's for that area. And they wouldn't take that step back and go, well, actually, this is just me solving an issue for something that's broken, or this is just me getting something that I didn't have that I need. And once you get that, you realize that you can elevate perspective to a point where it starts to cover a lot more things than when you're too close to something. So I think the separation from issues can sometimes make perception a lot wider than it was before.
Yeah, it's funny. I don't have kids, but you know, big passionately believe in the power of perspective. Um, I think where it's really started for me was I lived in. You've done my fair share of world travels, but I lived in Shanghai for almost a year. And when I tried to explain it to other people, when they said, "What was the number one thing you learned from your experience there?" And I always said, one word. I said, "There's perspective." And I think for me in that scenario, it was about the culture was fundamentally different at its core, an Eastern culture versus a Western culture, and I started realizing that so many things that I just made assumptions about other people, if your foundational point of view was completely different, you just looked at things in a totally different way, and I couldn't wrap my head around how different how different certain perspectives were, and it really forced me to start backing away from things I looked at with very clear assumptions about how something should work or whatever, and then realize, like, put yourself in that person's shoes and try and have extreme empathy for it, and that's why I think you could argue that kids don't like, just like how we have decades of ingrained societal cultural biases that impact our perspective, the kids that just don't have that, right? So, or the things that drove the people that they are at the age of 8 or 10, they just don't have that conditioning that we have. And I think it's such a fascinating way to think about human behavior. um,
It's interesting. So I'd never thought about that before, but you're right. Culture has a huge play in this. And when I know, obviously, I haven't necessarily lived in all these places, but I've traveled around the world and done business in a lot of places. And when someone explains the logic and explains the culture and the reason behind it, then the thing that does help you do is it helps you understand their perspective. But
mhm.
yeah, culture is a great driver of perspective. It's a really good point.
Yeah, it's so I guess I'm gonna. So I think as we talk about today's subject, because I don't have kids, but obviously I'd like to believe I have a high level of empathy for everyone around me. I might be thinking about things through this kind of cultural lens. It'd be interesting to see where we net out on some of the things we're about to do. So what I thought would be a really fun way of approaching this subject of perspective was having basically a little bit of a brainstorm session. So
Right.
nothing. This is like, there's two tech guys. They say don't do real time demos. So we're about to do a real-time brainstorming session and hope that it doesn't go horribly off the rails in front of a live audience. And
Oh, I
also
see.
worth noting, and those of you who are watching live, listening live, and you've got chat, if you've got ideas or thoughts you want to throw in the chat and we think they're compelling, we might pick them up and address them. So feel free to chime in at any second. So I'm going to throw out some different concepts of what things that we think will be totally basic, totally different for the adults of tomorrow because the experiences that they're having today as kids, basically. And at the same time, I
Mhm.
really want to make sure we don't lose, let's call it sight of perspective about how some of these things that might look odd to us or even potentially odd to some of our audience. So with that, Dave, I will throw it out to you. I'm sure you have some stuff in your mind that could be interesting subjects. So, guest of honor gets to pick the first one. Not to
So,
put you on the
so,
spot.
so it's funny. So I've got you were saying you haven't got kids. I've got two kids. One will be 16 this year, and the other one she'll be 12 this year. So I've got effectively. So this is interesting. I've effectively got two generations. I've got a Gen Z because she was
Yeah,
born
fair
after
point.
1997, and I've also got a Gen Alpha, which is effectively a subset of Gen Z because she was born 2010, and and the interesting thing is that for all the for all the goodwill in the world, even though we're now talking in this digital media, we're not digital natives. You know, I was born 7 years after the cassette player was invented, so it's not like I can say I was born in the digital age, but they were. So they were born when technology was available to everyone. And interestingly enough, even though there's only a 3.5 year gap between them, completely different ways that they use technology. But the first thing that I think is interesting about the way they approach things is their perspective and their sense of ownership. So
Hmm.
we were looking once. I'm into music, and we had like some CDs lying around, and they were looking at CDs, and and I thought we were going to have the conversation. What's a CD? But we had the conversation about why had I bought the CDs, and I said, well, I bought the CDs so I could own the music, and they said, well, why do you need to own the music? Why don't you just listen to it? So so that's interesting in
I love
itself.
that. I love that. It wasn't even about the media. It's like an existential question about the subject, effectively.
Yeah.
Deep.
Well, why do you need to own it? Because they've been used to just consuming it whenever they want it.
Yeah, I love
And
that.
and, and that goes through everything. I think that concept of ownership, whether it's people needing to own cars, whether it's people needing to own devices to make things, or whether they just use maker communities, Apple TV, Spotify, Netflix, Uber. It's all about the service that's being provided. It's not about ownership. Even to the point now that I think is funny. Even the things that you buy digitally. You might buy a movie on Apple TV. You don't own that movie, even though you bought it. I mean, it's a different way of thinking
Because
about.
on their platform, effectively, if you stop using their platform, then you effectively haven't got the ownership. I wonder
Yeah.
if these kind of things, um, not to put any kind of negative slant on the future, but I think as we continue to move forward in time, scarcity may becomes an increased issue on some level, and I wonder if like the need for, or at least in terms of physical assets and things like that, I wonder if like that sense of ownership becomes even less and less important to people of the younger generation because no one feels the need to just own it in totality, and also that might drive costs down. So if costs are going up, the shared ownership theoretically drives costs down as well.
So I'm gonna counter that, but
Yeah.
I'm gonna counter it, and perhaps I'm gonna argue myself out of an argument. Um,
Go for it.
so,
It wouldn't be the
so,
first time I've seen someone do that on a show.
so, so you were saying I've just gone out then and said people don't feel the need to own things, and you were saying you were talking about scarcity, and does that affect price? So the interesting exception to all this then becomes NFTs, because now you've got something that is a piece of digital media that people do want to own. So
Yeah.
people are going out and buying NFTs, so they're the only person who has it, and
Yeah.
we can talk about the logistics of whether they really own it. But when I said that, when that thought came to my mind, I wondered whether the only people who are buying NFTs are people like us. I can't
Yeah.
imagine my kids buying an NFT. So maybe
Yeah.
it's a different generation that buys them.
Yeah. Or like a collectible, but I think, maybe it's a mindset around and more around art than it is around, maybe it's things that people feel that there's like, inherent value in versus, and this may be the thing about perspective. It's like when you start thinking about a younger generation, rethinking how, what's important to own. Things like a car may be commoditized to them. It's
Right.
utilitarian. So maybe ownership becomes less important around utilitarian things. Maybe things that have creative value or are passionate, anything that's related to an artist or something that they love. You start putting the big L into things. And I think that reshuffles perspective as well, which I think is quite interesting as well.
Ca-
Um, yeah,
cars are interesting. Just to touch on cars, because
yeah,
you brought it up. When you think about the perspective of ownership of a car, it's much more, as you said, it's much more about the service the car provides. But it's interesting to see car manufacturers are even starting to look at that now. Car manufacturers are looking at, you see some of them looking at how you can upgrade the software over the air. But I know I've been speaking to companies like Fisker, and they were talking about being able to do physical upgrades to cars. So when new components come out, can you have a dashboard that can be swapped out? And that comes down to the longevity of cars. And I think it's because people are thinking that people might want cars for longer because they don't want to buy the new car for having the new car. They want to buy the new car for having the new
the new
features or the
feature.
new functionality. So
I'm embarrassed to admit that I'm literally considering buying a new car because I want Android Auto to work in it,
right,
and it's like it's pathetic. But like I'm not. I keep talking myself off the ledge, by the way, because I'm not quite that crazy. But the fact that I'm even thinking about it means other people are pulling the trigger, and that kind of stuff.
yeah, I
So
agree.
segue a little bit. So a moment ago we were talking about the kind of like button. Um, and I think there's a concept of this kind of like real time interaction or feedback that is common with youth today. Do you have a take on that?
Um, so so I didn't have, well, actually, there's one experience that changed the way I thought about it from a work perspective.
Yeah.
But it is interesting to note that there's, if my kids post something on social media, you can sense attention until it's liked. And I know I've had both of them say to me occasionally, "Oh, did you see that post I put on Instagram?" And I know that's them saying to me, "You haven't yet
Passively
liked." But
aggressively. Yeah.
but the thing that freaked me out from going back to a perspective of work was having a conversation once where I was speaking to my wife, and the two kids were in the kitchen, and I said, "Oh, this month, I think this quarter, it must have been the last month of the quarter," and I said, "Oh, I get my bonus this quarter." I was telling my wife I get my bonus, and and my youngest kid said, "What's a bonus?" And I said, "Well, it's a reward the company gives you for doing a good job." And she said, "So it's like a really big like." And I said, "Well, kind of, but there's cash associated to it." And then I said to my wife, "But after this, we're going to move to yearly bonuses." And my oldest kid said, "Well, you've got to wait like 12 months to find out if you're doing a good job." And I said, no, you're constantly having meetings with managers, and they're telling you if you're doing a good job. So you've always got that feedback loop, and it's just a way of controlling behavior. And she said
Yeah.
to me, well, if you really wanted to control, if you really wanted people to know they were doing a good job every day, why don't you just give them a bonus every day? And I was like, yep. that's 100% correct. If at the end of every day someone sat down with you and said, this was really good, that was really bad, do more of this, do less of that, then you would be on that path. And she thought it was ridiculous, even when we had quarterly bonuses, that you could go in the wrong direction for 12 weeks and then find out at the end of that 12 weeks you weren't doing the right thing. But
You know what's so interesting about this concept is, like, I think in the corporate world, you hear people talk about continuous feedback and things like that being kind of, corporate lingo. But I think what you're saying is, when we think about it through this perspective of people from a new generation, is like, yeah, the speed at which they are interacting with media, interacting with everything around them, basically, that's like they try and imagine what we're doing, and then it's going to feel slow, basically, and then we need to like 10x that or 50x it or whatever to make it relevant to their world. It's
absolutely.
fascinating. And on some level, I guess, youth, and we've been experiencing this for a while, but I think even more so the youth of today. It's like you're actually perpetually getting these feedback loops all the time. So I think one of the things with when you talk about perspective and you talk about these kind of changed behaviors is we don't necessarily think about it this way of certain generations, but this is actually ingrained into their culture
Yeah.
every day, and it's going to have a profound impact on how they behave and operate as adults. That's really interesting. Um, so I got one for you. Uh, I think that I'm going to call it a concept of collective intelligence. And what I
Right.
mean by this is, I think there is a behavior today that people, basically youth, are less inclined to need to remember anything. I think you see it in the ways that, changing how people are being taught and study, that the memorization becomes less important, because basically there's this giant instant repository of knowledge for everything. I think it becomes more of like a training around, like, how do I search, filter, and sift to the right information faster, so I can have instant access to information. And I think that when you start thinking about how this is going to play out in the future, and again, I'm going to mention some things that I know don't exist today, but I think we're really on the precipice of, when we're starting to look at potentially augmented reality and things like that basically start removing the friction between how we access information in a real time basis. I think this idea that, like, we all become almost like a little bit, it sounds like we're becoming less intelligent by not knowing this stuff on demand. But I would argue humans and the adults of tomorrow become super intelligent because they get really good at basically accessing this collective intelligence we can all get to. Does that sound crazy, or what's your take on that as an actual dad?
Not really. I mean, I think especially when even if you think of it from a technology perspective, with some of the work that Elon Musk's doing around Neuralink, that concept of being more connected and not needing to necessarily know as much does get interesting. Whether that's looking at how it connects to a nerve system, or looking at how it connects to data. The the interesting thing, again, to go back to kids, is watching how they interface to things. So if if someone says something, let's say we're having a conversation, even a conversation now on this video session, and you say something and I don't know what it is, I could effectively Google it and find out. They'll do it conversationally, so they're much more happy with a voice interface. So they will
Mm,
just give it the whole, hey Google, Siri, whatever, what is, and they will just ask the question, and the question comes back with an answer.
mm,
And to them, that's exactly the same as them asking me something. It's almost like that source of knowledge is just like asking another person a question. They don't seem to differentiate.
Worth noting, we have many a debate settled at the dinner table with us, where it's like we'll be talking about something, then one of us just yells something out to one of the speakers in the house as a question. Another crazy question for you. This is a bit of a tangent, but what we just talked about was, I think, this willingness, basically, that, or this change in how basically people of a younger generation basically access information, and their perspective on on what knowledge is important to retain is probably very, very different. I think at the same time, there's a big trend out there where I would also argue that basically people, younger generations, and every subsequent younger generation is increasingly comfortable with sharing more of themselves on the internet, in social media. So I think I think privacy. People say they care about privacy and they're paranoid about people tracking them, but at the same time, we're all increasingly sharing more and more of ourselves, up onto the web and so on. And so my question basically is, you hear people talking about things like Neuralink and potentially like machine interfaces, to connect to the web or things like that. I suspect that if you took a poll of, let's say people in their 40s or 30s or whatever, and asked, would you ever consider doing some kind of Neuralink like interface if it meant you could search the web in real time, that you would see a huge, huge jump with younger generations being like, yeah, that's fine, because I think they're more comfortable with a sense of privacy and access, in this case, literal access if you think of your brain. And it plays into this shifting perspective of if they're all about accessing information faster and in quicker real time, that this just removes even more friction around that. Like, follow. So, does that sound crazy to you, or do you think that is a potential shift we could see in future generations?
It is interesting. I mean, so I agree with what you're saying, that you would see this generational preference for being permanently connected to the internet would go down when it was younger, and it's probably, I think some of it's probably again going back to what we said before about the younger you are, the less tied down you are by the weight of knowledge, because probably the older you get, the more fear is that data link isn't a one way thing. That although you can ask for information, you're never aware of what information is being
Yeah,
taken.
yeah, yeah,
There is, I do notice a difference between my kind of 12-year-old and 15-year-old, that, that even though you were saying, hey, the younger people are prepared to share more, the
mm,
the younger one of the two actually shares slightly less than the older one, because she's seen things go wrong. She's seen
mm,
information be used in wrong ways, so
mhm,
she's a little bit more conscious about what she shares. But I
mhm,
think it's interesting. I suppose this is one of the drivers for Web 3.0, looking at how you start to control that data and how you release it. And I think I thought one of the most fascinating projects was that I'd seen recently was Tim Berners-Lee's Solid project, where he
mhm,
was looking at how do you build a digital token where you control the data that's in it. Because right now, I think what's happening in the digital world, what's happened in the physical world. So let's say I want to go and buy alcohol somewhere, and I get carded. I mean, I haven't been carded for 30 years, but let's say I went in and someone said, "Hey, are you 21?" I'd show them a driving license. And I'm not just telling them I'm 21. I'm telling them everything. I'm telling them where I live, my height, my eye color, um, my date of birth, when all
yeah,
they really know is, are you 21 or not?
yeah.
So having that concept of being able to give people the information they want rather than much more information is something that we've always done physically, but I think we started to do it digitally as well.
So it's an interesting line. I think we're all going to have to figure out over the next couple of years. And I can. It's a great point you make about your younger one kind of holding back on things. There's something that I think is easy to I think misunderstand when you start thinking about these. We start to as people who are, I hate using the word futurist, but I know you and I both like to think forward thinking about what's next and what's out there and so on. And I would argue that I think people think progress is this kind of line that's kind of doing this, but I think there's it's like there's basically like I feel like as a group we tend to go up, then we almost pull back a little bit because we realize we screw some stuff up, and then it's like, and then and so there's like a little bit of a pushback because we're like, oh, that didn't work so hard. But then I do feel like it kind of dips and it goes back up again as people kind of start to work the kinks out of the system. It's almost like that. That kind of classic, like, early adopter, and then you've got with the trough of disillusionment, all the people who jumped in early and then kind of go, oh,
Right.
I'm not sure that was so good. I think that is like a general concept with a societal change, because I think there's always some kind of pushback there. It'd be interesting to see, um, with your youngest, if that kind of pushback around privacy is that something that sticks with him or her forever, or is it something that, like I said, it's like a cautionary feeling they've got at one step. So yeah, very interesting. I mean, I think one of the other reasons I just feel I feel like people are going to keep sharing more and more of themselves is, I think and this is a great example where like things have gone wrong. I think we kept sharing more information, but the value exchange was wrong. And what I mean by that is, like, the value exchange, for example, until recently was great for the advertisers. Not so sure it's great, for all the people giving up that information. And I think
Right.
basically, that we'll start seeing the information being used more for like personalized experiences, just a better understanding of you, so you get better digital experiences. And I think people go, oh, I'll share a bit more again. But we're going to keep figuring this out, and hopefully we don't screw it up too badly in the meantime. Um, so I'd love to ask you, what's your take on, you mentioned kind of gaming earlier, and this sense of ownership. Uh, you talked about, kind of wanting to buy a console at some point. Um, do you think, do you think it's about the devices anymore, or do you think it's about the content? Because we're seeing more and more of these gaming services now, all just, I think Microsoft and like PlayStation are starting to deliver everything to apps that could be on smart TVs. I mean, I'm starting to wonder if like the console generation, that war is even over.
Yeah, I suppose with with kind of ubiquitous access and with network speeds now, there's kind of less need to have that processing power remotely. You might still get, for a while, the console manufacturers might still use exclusivity as a
Yeah,
way of keeping things in, but then it just becomes a balance. How
yeah,
how long is it worth keeping it exclusive to get people to buy that console, as opposed to letting the entire world use it, and
yeah,
and,
yeah.
and that kind of balance comes in. I think gaming's interesting. So I can't remember whether it was a magazine article or it was a podcast I was listening to the other day, but someone was saying that the whole concept of gaming and mental health, that gaming had become the new meditation. And I was like, no, that's, surely people aren't meditating with games. And then I thought about the massive kind of adult rush for people playing things like Candy Crush. And I
Yeah.
think it is that all of a sudden it's like, yeah, I'm going to immerse myself in something that's useless for 20 minutes, but I'm not going to
Yeah.
be distracted for 20 minutes. I'm not going to
Yeah.
think about anything else. So maybe there is something in it being a form of
I,
meditation.
I actually look. So the last weekend, I just moved to North Carolina. For those of you following Ship, and my closest friends was up visiting, and we went on a hike and we sat by a waterfall. And he said, "Look, I've gotten really into meditation lately. I'm trying to do it every day." And we sat there for kind of 20 minutes or so and listening to the water. And he was teaching me how to kind of when my mind started to wander, to focus on my breath and to count my breaths and focus on the counting if I kept going too ADD, frankly, in my mind wandering. And it was wonderful on a side note, and something I think I should lean into more. But I mean, as a guy who also is quite passionate about gaming, I actually think on some level that what gaming does is it focuses your mind. And I always, kind of half joke that I'm not clever enough basically to play video games and think about work at the same time. So I do
Right.
think there's something meditative about it, in the sense that, like, I just they're engaging enough that they do focus your brain. Maybe it's not the same as be, the zenning out with the Dalai Lama. But I do think if it stops you stressing out about, what a prick your boss is or something for an hour, then good on you. so, so
So
I want to. Oh, go ahead, Dave.
I was gonna say I've got an interesting one, because we were talking then about meditation and thinking, and that kind of you talked about being distracted by work. So I wondered whether another thing to throw out there around perspective and what might change is, do we think do we think careers will change? Because now you're at this point where there was, I think it was the Stanford Center for Longevity released some new figures the other week, where they say that 50% of the 5 year olds alive today will live to be 100. So you've
Oh,
started to see this increase in longevity, and I've noticed, the first time I noticed it was, I interviewed someone for a product management job, maybe like 5 years ago, and guy was straight out of university, really wanted the job, really interested. Said, hey Dave, I like you, I like your company, I really want to work for you, and I'd be happy to give this like 3 days a week. And I was like, what do you mean? It's not about 3 days a week, it's a job. It's going to be 5 days a week. And his view was that he'd benefit and that both companies would benefit if he worked for one company for 3 days and another company for 2 days, because it increases experience, it made him more efficient.
it's a
And it,
compelling pitch. It's part of why people work with external agencies or consulting firms, because they want that diversity of experience. So there is a solid argument there.
or whether
Yeah,
people start doing retraining, whether this is a generation that might do something for 15 years and then might do something completely different for 15 years.
yeah. I can only dream about how this one's going to roll out, but I definitely think that the concept of work is fundamentally changing. Right. I'm actually working on, and this is the first time I've ever mentioned it on the air. I'm actually working on a book about rethinking some of the ways that people do working models and business models, and I think it's like an evolution of this kind of gig economy. People talk about kind of portfolio careers as a subject I think is really interesting. And I think what that person was asking for is that. And you look at like how we used to talk to kids, even 10 years ago or longer. It's about picking a career. And I think a lot of kids would say, well, they had multiple things they did, and we always wanted to try and push them into one swim lane. And I think that that is not probably the future. And maybe maybe we can now indulge the kids saying, I want to be a fireman, or what I mean, I want to
Right.
be something. And maybe, and I think you'll find seeing parents going, great, you should do that, and here's how
Yeah.
you do it. And I think that's something that wouldn't have happened in the past.
I mean, and to be honest, that would be cool. I'd love to do something
Yeah.
some days of the week and other things another day.
Exactly right.
But it's I suppose it's a lot of it's down to how you actually manage that. One of the things I've been talking to people around was, how long will we employ people to do jobs as opposed to employ people because of specific skills they've got. So
Yeah.
almost, could you have a gig economy that sat within an enterprise, almost like a distributed autonomous organization within your company. So when you had a piece of work that needed to be done, a document to be written, an event to be coordinated, a presentation to be created, to actually throw that out to an internal community in your company and have them be able to take that work based on how difficult it was, what the timescales were, and actually have them rate each other's work as well. Because then the reason this came up was, I really wanted to learn Photoshop, but I didn't have a reason to learn Photoshop. And I thought, if there was someone out there that wanted something doing and it was pretty simple, I could take that and do it and give it back to them, and that would allow me to gradually start learning something new. Because I've had the counter argument where people say, well, if you do a gig enterprise, all the people are going to do is be good at one thing. But I actually think it's a chance for you to learn to do other things as well.
The problem with this is that the hyper specialization, I think, is a great way to build a lot of value for yourself. But what happens is, if there's a shift and you're so hyper specialized that what you've done becomes redundant, then you're in a
Right,
lot of trouble.
right,
And I've talked to many people throughout my career who been put in that predicament. And it's really sad actually when someone's an incredible expert at something and they weren't able to find the opportunity to basically learn these new things because there
Huh.
was no diversification in their skill set.
Right.
So, I want to be conscious of time. I think this is a great place to jump off. I had a million other things I could have talked to you about today. I think we need about 6 more episodes of this with you, Dave. So this was a really fun episode for me personally. I could chat with you endlessly. We have to meet in person for dinner or beer sometime. I would
Absolutely.
really love.
Absolutely.
Dave, real quick, if people want to learn more about you or find you, where should they be looking in social media or things like that to kind of follow your adventures?
Yeah, you can follow me on LinkedIn. If you go to Twitter, my handle's the right view, so you can see
That's
some of
awesome.
my tweets. Uh,
When
video.
you got that Twitter handle, were you like,
So the story, I'll tell you the story. The story, I used to work for a company called VMware, and VMware
yeah,
had a virtualized desktop product called View. And when
yeah,
I was registering for Twitter, whenever it was 15 years ago, I thought I may as well use the word View for the desktop management software, and tested the right View, and no one had got it, so I took it.
awesome. I love it. So, well, again, follow Dave on Twitter at The Right View. You can find him on LinkedIn. For those of you who are tuning in live, or whether you're watching us on any of our post-recorded shows, whether you're on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, thank you so much for watching and following. We really appreciate you tuning in. The best way you can do to support the show is to basically give us a like, give us a follow, tell your friends. Yeah, this is not something we do for any other reason than just finding great, smart people that we want to have great chats with and share that great content with you. So thank you again for your time. And always check us out at oshipshow.com. You can see all the other great ways that you can engage with us. Dave, thank you again. Great fun today. And I look forward to meeting you in person in the near future.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.